Hey, everybody, and welcome to the brand called you. So, listen, the other day I got a call from my financial advisor, and he was super excited. He wanted to know if I had read the essay he'd written on global trends in the market based on the Trump administration's policies. And of course, I faked it. I said, "Oh, it was just wonderful. Thank you." What he doesn't know is every time he sends me one of his essays, I literally, my eyes roll in the back of my head and my face falls in the salad plate. It's so boring. I'm not a finance person, granted, but I have never been able to make it through any book, any essay on finance ever because I don't speak the language and it's just facts and figures. That is until this week when I was given an advanced copy of a brand new book on finance called New Rules of Investing: Essential Wealth Strategies for Turbulent Times. It's been co-written by Mark Haefele, who's the Global Chief Investment Officer at UBS Bank in Zurich, and our guest today, Richard Morais. So I'm super excited because most of you probably know Richard Morais's name because he reached international stardom when his novel, The 100-Foot Journey, came out and was turned in 2014 into a feature film starring Helen Mirren. It was fantastic. He's written a slew of other books, including a novel called The Man with No Borders, that's also about to be put into a film. And so I couldn't be more excited to have Richard with us. Welcome.
Thank you, Lisa.
So, it's
Wait,
funny,
wait,
but
wait. I gotta say something to your audience. So I knew Lisa, we were kids together in Zurich, Switzerland, and she and I invented a language, and one of the words that we say was Stummicha. Don't ask us what it means, but we dumbfounded all our friends. So anyway, it's just the delight that, 40 years later, I'm sitting down now having a conversation with Lisa.
well, and what's so funny is things really do come full circle because not only did we recently meet again after all that time, but most people think of you as a novelist, as a fiction writer. But actually, this book in finance shouldn't come as a surprise because, in a way, you're coming full circle to your earliest career, right? Which was as a finance journalist with a number of publications, including Forbes, where you became European. I mean, tell us a bit about that early incarnation.
Well, again, Lisa and I both went to Sarah Lawrence College, which was also a serendipitous occurrence. But what happens when I always wanted to live off of my writing, and I always wanted to be a fiction writer, but I had a family and I needed money. So I wound up starting at Forbes magazine in my, when I was 23. When I was 26, they sent me to London and I became their European bureau chief. I was there for 18 years. I was their longest serving foreign correspondent. Then I came back to the States, and then an old friend of mine was the editor-in-chief of Barron's. And after 25 years at Forbes, you have to reinvent we often stay too long in a certain place out of comfort, but I had to reinvent myself. And he asked me, I had this kind of idea to create him. I noticed that wealthy families, they have unique information needs, which is basically how do you prevent family dynamics from destroying the family business? And I mean that's it in a
Yeah.
nutshell. And families really control the global economy. I mean, it varies from country to country, but it's sort of anywhere between 65% and 75% of the global economy is in the hands of families. But if you read the Wall Street Journal or the Financial Times every day, you would think it was politicians, multinational corporations, and multilateral institutions that control the world. And it's not, it's families. So I had always had this idea. I wanted to write a family-oriented wealth management magazine. And Ed Finn, who was the editor-in-chief and president of Barron's at the time, called me and said, I have this tiny little paper insert. And I said, oh my gosh, this is exactly what I wanted. So I went and built for them a magazine called Penta. It turned into a glossy magazine, which was for wealthy families. And in the process, I met this guy who had just joined UBS called Mark Haefele. And Mark was he was previously he made his name as a young man at hedge fund. He was one of the first to detect fraud at Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. he and his partner, and and then he went, anyway, to make a long story short, he wound up, UBS was going through some changes after the great financial crisis, and they were creating a centralized chief investment office. And I met Mark, and he immediately struck me because I had, through Forbes and Barron's, always dealt with Wall Street people, of course, and wealth managers. But this guy was immensely well read, and he immediately stood out. I said, "Oh God, this guy's literary." And then he went off and read all my novels. Now, there is nothing that's going to turn a narcissistic writer on more than, and I think because of the book you just mentioned, The Man with No Borders, which is about a private banker
Hmm.
dying in Switzerland, a Spanish private banker in Switzerland who's dying and having to come to terms with his life. I think so anyway, I pitched it. I said, I got to stay in touch with this guy. He's pretty amazing. And so I started badgering him and saying, we need to do a book together. We need to do
Yeah.
a book together. And then, I'm sorry, I'm being a little
No, no,
long-winded.
no, it's
I'm,
okay.
I'm getting to the punchline. So what happened is then, you know, journalism has essentially collapsed, or the digital age has destroyed the business model
Mhm.
for high quality journalism. And you know, so I can't do kind of vacuous kind of
Let me just stop you for a minute. When you say high quality, you mean you can't do anything more than sound bites now, the in-depth.
exactly. Yeah. Or that, if you walk into a newsroom today, you'll be getting a list of words that are trending, and they say, figure out how to put these words
Yeah,
in your title
right,
of, or write, if it's tomatoes, figure out how to get tomatoes into your article.
right.
And it used to be with the old quality. I mean, at Forbes, I could work on a story for 6 months. I could report a story for 6 months. The idea of that now is just anathema. And not only that, the idea was that, if you read the Wall Street Journal or Financial Times every day, you're covered. If you come to Forbes, we have to produce stories that you've never seen before. And we have to. You haven't heard about this yet, but we think in 6 months you're going to hear a lot about this, and we are getting you this information first. That's how, the old style journalism. These days, it's pure algorithm-driven journalism. You're kind of reacting off of whatever what's in the news cycle at the moment. And I just could not jive with that. That's not the way my mind works. I was always about go where no one else is going and find information that you think is important and necessary. So I had to reinvent myself. And so, learning from private equity, I went to Mark and I said, look, Mark, I think you got a great book in you. And I have a suggestion. Let's do like a private equity deal, which is you pay my salary for 2 years, and I will channel your voice. Like in fiction, that's what I do, like a character actor. I channel strange character's voice, very different from who I am. I will channel your voice and help you write a book for a larger audience, uh, um, and then we'll sell our book in the marketplace, and then I'll return 2/3 to you slash UBS for fronting the money, and I'll keep the third in the back end. So
It's
that's
really
how that's how it came about. And so the idea was that our reputations, i.e., both our names are on. I mean, it's Mark's book. I'm just the enabler. But it's what he wants to say. But I was the enabler, but also our financial interests are aligned just like they do in private equity. So it's very different than it's a literary partnership rather than a ghostwriting.
But it's so brilliant because I really was genuinely serious when I read it and I really enjoyed it. And so, I'm a storyteller and a story strategist. So the first rule of thumb when I'm working with corporate executives is I say, don't think like you normally do. Don't think what's the most important information that I should be saying, what do audiences want to hear, and start with what fascinates you and what you're passionate about. Start with your own emotional center. And in a way, I felt like you were doing just that. It was so interesting. You could feel that he was starting, the whole book was starting from a core of what he's passionate about, what he's fascinated about, and how if we channel where our passions are, whether it be impact investing, or whether it be passionate about the culture, the environment, and really go from there. And I
Or
bet
history
it's
in his case,
intoxicating.
because he's a history buff.
And first of all, the historical stories are quite amazing in there. I mean, I guess I just wanted to start with it with a couple of, a couple of these great stories. So, um, not everybody knows what impact investing is, but investing in companies that not only can make you some money but do good in the world too. And it's become increasingly more interesting. But one of the things I adored about your book was you gave you shared so many wonderful stories about not only of the success of impact investing, both at a profitability level, but also in a humanitarian way. I don't know if you can share any of
Yeah,
those.
well, thank you. No, I mean, that really is very much to UBS's credit, because what they did, so when writing, a lot of people think it's looking for the right word. It's actually not. You're really looking for the right image or the right feel,
Mm,
because that is becomes part of your emotional intelligence, and
yeah.
then resonates with you, so that when you're in the shower 2 months later and you're trying to solve a business problem, then this emotional story that resonated with you pops into your head.
Mm,
That's the really the writing about business. The great editor of Forbes magazine, Jim Michaels. I was his protege, and we asked him. It wasn't me, but a friend of mine asked him, so, what is, as a young reporter, what is the thing that I should do to become a great business journalist? And he said, read poetry. I said, read poetry. And he said
wow.
because he said we can teach you how to calculate return on equity, but we can't teach you love of language, and that's what's missing from business journalism.
I love that.
And so that's that was my upbringing. So I'm often looking for the right sound or picture or sensibility and or image to make a point. So I got Mark. I think some of the strongest stories are stories about his, you know, quirks with money, personal quirks with money, which he very generously shared, that came from his childhood experiences, but also, as you say, these stories from UBS clients. And UBS, very smartly, they flew me around the world to talk to some fascinating clients from around the world whose stories I shared. And a lot of them about your impact. Is what happens is that when we in the art, the stages of wealth creation, once you've got enough to pay your bills and a little bit extra, most people say, something dies. I can't make money just for the sake of money. I have to have some kind of a meaning or purpose in my life. Uh, and so what they do, it used to be historically that then you go did philanthropy,
Mm,
and they were two separate. Well, in the
yeah.
last 15, 20 years, those two things have been merging. So
Hmm.
that there is a way to invest that serves your emotional cause. And Mark's point that I learned is that we think that there's these formulas for your portfolio and your wealth creation. And what UBS has taught me and Mark has taught me is that it really should flow at your portfolio should agitate out from who you are and what you want in life.
Love that.
And otherwise, it becomes money for the sake of making money. And if you understand why you're doing something, that is to reach a certain goal in life that you have, then you're much more likely to stay the course when markets deep six and go through their periodic, routes, and not panic sell, because you're seeing a bigger picture and you're heading towards a personal goal and a bigger goal than just, reacting in the moment.
Can you give me one of your favorite impact investor stories from the people you met as you flew around? And
Yeah, so I think well, there was two of them. So one of them was uh, he was a former Yugoslav who got out of Yugoslavia, and he became an oil and gas engineer, classic oil and gas engineer. A very brilliant man. He can see entire systems, and he became a specialist in oil reservoir management. Well, he also, I mean, when he reached, his late 50s, he said, I can't do this anymore. He loved sailing, he loved nature, and it just the conflict between the environmental damage, and and so he completely reinvented his business, and he figured out um, how I don't want it's very technical, and I explain it and hopefully in a way
Yeah.
that accessible. But he figured out using technology how to make the oil and gas extraction carbon neutral from discovery to the delivery to the end client. And the other thing, though, is that he then tackled one of the biggest bottlenecks of the clean energy industry, which is wind and solar are great, but there's two problems. One, the solar energy is generated massively in the summer, but when you really need it in the winter, it's not available. And the same thing with wind. It generates when there's a strong wind, but when you actually need it, it might not be, there might be no wind. So how do you, so there's been new breakthroughs in sort of uh, uh, of converting this energy into liquid energy
Wow.
that needs to be stored. And the idea is that then you create these huge batteries. Well, the batteries are environmentally they're geopolitically difficult because the minerals, the rare minerals that you need to create batteries are in geopolitical parts of the world that are very difficult. And the second thing is that they're not environmentally friendly. These are creating huge industrial sized batteries. It's not environmentally friendly. So he because of his brilliance and his knowledge of underground reservoirs, he said, look, these are Earth's natural batteries. You have, for millions of years, they've been storing energy underground safely, which is oil and gas reserves, safely underground due to their rock formations that's encasing them. So as these oil and gas wells get depleted, his idea is and because of he can do this, is to take this liquid gas that has, in the summer converted solar energy converts into sort of liquid fuels, then pump them down into these depleted oil and gas reserves and store
God,
them until they're ready and needed in winter, and then feed them back into the energy grid. I mean, that's the kind of
amazing.
brilliant thinking. And what I love about it is, you know, people's trying to solve in the industry, trying to solve the clean energy necessity for us to survive in time is much more effective. Though that's how solutions are really, we need people picketing, Exxon. We need that too. But someone like Pavle really taking his own emotion and refiguring out how to make wealth in the 21st century way that will create wealth and extend our chances of surviving the century is just, to me, it's like the holy grail. So that's why it was so inspiring.
It's interesting. There's like, if there's one central theme in your book, it's that whether it's you, the investor, or you, the creator, it's about being flexible with your imagination, being willing to rethink and recalibrate your preconceived notions, like rewiring your brain. And I love the way you said, rewire and rethink your investment strategy in a world where free markets are out and government intervention is in. And this was very interesting to me because a lot of us don't think that way. What is government investing in right now? You have a stunning quote about how much money America, 16% of their GDP alone on healthcare. And um, just to follow that is very, very interesting to me in ways of investing.
Well, that's another. Thank you for bringing that up because that's another thing that which blew me away. Mark got me to think completely differently just by, for 3 years, I got to talk to him pretty much every single week.
Interesting.
And it was like sitting at the feet of the master. And, here's the guy who's running $4 trillion, advising or managing $4 trillion. He's one of the most important investors in Wall Street, even though, he might not be a household name like Warren Buffett. But I mean, this guy moves money,
Yeah.
and what he thinks. And he made me realize is that, first of all, what people don't realize is that whatever political party has been in power over the last 50 years in America, the US government share of GDP has been steadily rising.
Hmm.
Uh, that's why we're seeing what we're seeing right now. There's some people have recognized that, how they're going
In
about.
what we're seeing in what area specifically?
Sorry, the slashing that's going on in
Got it.
DC right now. This is a shocking approach, personally, to see how they're doing it. But the idea that government had to scale back is quite true, because what people don't realize, um, during COVID, the U.S. share of GDP was greater than it was during World War II.
Oh, interesting.
I mean, that's like a hard even during World War II, the government was involved in the private sector less than they were in 2020. And that's a hard, and it's just been steadily rising. And so there is, once you do that, there is a tipping point where you crowd out the private sector. But Mark's point, or UBS's point, the chief investment officer's point, is that that's why knowing what the macro trends in the world are so important to modern wealth, 21st century investing, because you have to know where the big funny money flows are, and that is where the governments are doing, because they have carrots and sticks. And if they are saying, okay, we now want to invest, we think that climate change is a historic problem. Every government on earth has to deal with this, and we want money to flow into clean energy and away from fossil fuels. Uh, if you're an individual investor, you might find a wonderful oil and gas company with a low PE, but if the money is in the market is all flowing to this clean energy direction that government is dictating, you're going to get trampled by the elephants.
Yeah, I mean, you also mentioned a staggering quote, defense spending is growing 3 times faster than the global economy.
Right.
So I
And
can see,
right, so because all these demo, so Mark and UBS have come up with these sort of what they call the 5 Ds of disruption, and so um, uh, one of them is deglobalization. That is this geopolitical movement to break up into trading blocks, so that instead of everyone just lowering barriers, now barriers are coming back up. And so you can imagine in the future there'll be an Asian trading bloc, a European trading bloc, and an
yeah,
American trading bloc.
yeah,
That's kind of the direction we're heading. And uh, so, but there were other ones like that you mentioned, the medical. Well, the other one is demographics. All our, as the population on Earth has just exploded,
yeah,
by having less children.
yeah.
It's almost like a self-correct, the human animal is self-correcting by having less children. And that means our population is getting older and older and older, which of course requires more and more healthcare. And so that's another one. And you just mentioned that the defense is if you think through the trade. Well, if you're having trade blocks, then you have barriers and people fight, what are the borders? And so cybersecurity and all this new sort of geopolitical means that defense spending, which has been, European governments, for example, have been under investing in since for 40 years,
Yeah.
suddenly are saying, oh my gosh, we are behind the 8 ball. We can't rely on America as much as we used to in
Right.
the past.
The
We got
news
to
today.
we got a
Yep.
massive so again, and the other thing, if maybe because that's a good some of you will be shocked about defense spending is a smart thing to invest in. And one of the big lessons that I learned from Mark is when it comes to investing, and I'm not very good at this because I get too emotional, but when it comes to investing, is that it's amoral.
I was going to ask you about that amazing line in your book where you say you have to distinguish between immorality and amorality.
Right. And I talked a lot with Mark about this because sometimes he'd say things and I said, "Oh my God, you can't say that. It's just like people will freak out if you say that. It just sounds so cold." And he made me understand. And it's like he said, "Look, my job is to help people invest in the world the way it is in
Yes.
reality, not the way we wish it would be, should be, or the way it
And,
should be."
and you even quote the Serenity Prayer in there.
Exactly. Like I said, and he came up with that. I said, I had some Buddhist thing. He said, no, no, no. And he came up with this, and that's absolutely true. This sort of
Yeah.
this idea is that the serenity pair that, we accept
Hmm.
things that we cannot change.
Right.
We change the things that we have control over.
Yeah.
And we have the wisdom to distinguish between the two. That's at essence the serenity prayer. Well, that's also the way you invest. It's you park your um, woulda, shoulda, coulda worldview, your political worldview, your ethical worldview, so to speak, and say and take on the worldview is that my duty to my family and to my nation is to invest wisely and
Mm.
then figure out and then once you have that, see, then you combine it with your that's which the impact investing, which you
Right.
mentioned earlier, that's the second part. Then once you figure that out, then you put the two together. So then that's what this higher level of wealth investors do, is they figure out, but most of us are still on that scrabbling stage of trying to get our nest egg together. And
And
that's where you have these sort of very practical kind of
yeah,
guidelines.
kind of reminds me of me trying to play pickleball. Such an emotional player. And I don't like, I just get very reactive, you know? And I remember playing with this financial advisor and he said, I just turned the court into a spreadsheet. He was,
Wow.
he was very zen about it. It really worked for him.
Strategic. Yeah, it's strategic thinking,
It's
which
strategic thinking.
which is the other term for asset allocation, is strategic. That's the other thing that I should mention is that, if you turn on the financial news on television, it's all about, buy this stock, sell that stock, this is going up, that's going down.
Right.
Mark used to be, when he was in the hedge fund world, he was addicted to the excitement, and he realized, that he wasn't a world-class trader, and he was up against them, and he had to accept his own limitations and quirks and figure out an asset allocation that is where um, for those who don't know, those of your audience who don't know, that's when you don't invest in individual stocks.
Right.
What you do is you look at categories of investment and you make a predetermined percentage. You say, okay, I want 40% in bonds and 60% in equities. And then within equities of that 60%, I want 35% in international stocks and the rest
Right.
domestic stocks. And
Right.
that I want big companies and middle-sized companies and small. So you break that down, but you allocate certain percentages of your portfolio to all of these little, wealth sectors. And then, and this is the brilliance of it all, you periodically recalibrate or rebalance your portfolio. So if equities go up,
Mm.
and it's suddenly you had 60% of your portfolio in equities, but because stock markets are gone through 2 or 3 years of bull market, or that you sell stocks and buy the under and shore up your bond portfolio so you get back into the 60-40 mix. The brilliance of this is that it takes all the emotion out of buying and selling your investments. Because you're
Yeah.
forced mechanically, automatically to recalibrate, you are programmed to sell stocks when they're high and buy bond, in the case I just gave an example, and buy bonds when they're low.
Yeah.
And so that will your auto the system of allocating as it's so simple and it's so brilliant.
Yeah.
It's so, takes in our foibles as emotional human beings on how to approach investing. And yet most people are still addicted to the high drama, or they think they're clever enough to figure out that this stock is going up or that stock is going down.
Yeah. But so let me ask you, has this changed your strategy with your own money?
Yes, yeah. So, I mean, personally, I kind of was into asset allocation, but I had all my money at a Vanguard or and Fidelity, which do offer, but there are limited universes, and I couldn't periodically resist myself thinking, oh, I will override the allocations, and I think we should get out, you know. Now I actually so the financial so I this I don't mean this to be an advertisement for UBS, but I've transferred my money to UBS
Yeah.
because I saw two things. A, I needed a financial advisor to help me keep my emotional nose out of my portfolio. And so whenever I thought I was getting too clever, uh, they are there to help me, humble me, and,
Hmm.
and put me in my place. And the other thing is, a UBS is they are tracking 450 asset classes around the world. And when in a bear market, when the markets collapse, you want uncorrelated assets, meaning there are certain assets, let's say in your bond portfolio, we give an example. Well, if you have catastrophe bonds is a special kind of bond that insurance companies bring to market, and they only pay if they have to, if there's a earthquake in Chicago, and they have to pay for all these buildings that have collapsed, they have to pay it. That bond is only for that. So it's actually not correlated to interest rates and typical. So that's an uncorrelated asset. So you want your portfolio to have these uncorrelated
Yeah.
assets in there so that in a bear market, they don't respond like everything else in your portfolio.
Yeah.
And an organization like UBS is so big and so global that they can gather these all under one roof,
Oh,
that
great.
even a Vanguard and a Fidelity would have trouble mirroring.
Yeah. Wow. So I enjoyed it so much. I'm wondering, do you have any more books in this category in the works? And what else are you working on?
Well, so thank you for asking that. So every time you write a book, it's always, oh, this is the last. You really feel when you've done it, oh, this is the last I'll ever do. And then a few years later,
Yeah.
s part of it is opportunistic, is because I've reinvented the way I do these nonfiction in the financial category. I'm always looking for really interesting business people who like my private, want to create a literary partnership, and I pick them as much as they pick me.
Oh,
So I'm always open to suggestions,
okay.
but I have to feel that this book has a potential of
Yeah.
being sold internationally and
Yeah.
doing well,
Yeah.
like I am convinced Mark's book will do. And they're interesting. I think I have something to add and to help. I mean, the thing with Mark, how it worked was Mark is so brilliant and he's so used to speaking to sophisticated investors. And by talking to me, this dummy, if he could explain it in a way that this dummy could explain it to others, then we would have broadened the market. Conversely, so what we tried to do, he wanted, the co-founder of the Carlyle Group, David Rubenstein, to be able to pick this up, and Mark would not be embarrassed by him reading
Yeah.
it as well.
Yeah.
So we wanted, and that was why we worked so hard, was to write an investment book that a sophisticated investor could read and walk away with something, but also a novice intelligent person could walk away with, things that would spur them to think deeper and better about their own wealth management journey.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of things I'm always looking for. I can add value and that in a story that they have.
Hmm.
So
Anything coming up in that arena that you can talk about or?
not, no, not yet, not yet. I have a second book coming out at Memorial Day weekend. It's called Milford Moons, and I'm always working on a couple of things at a time, and so I was working on I've always wanted to. I get bored very easily, so I'm always looking, i.e., a nonfiction subject that gets me out of my comfort zone, and I have to learn things. I love
Yeah.
learning things,
Yeah.
so I'm looking for business people who in a field that I might not know about,
Yeah.
but I can help them tell the story to a larger audience, not the the wonks in their space. That's where I can contribute. But also I always like fiction. I always have my fiction going. So I always wanted to write a murder. So I started writing a murder mystery. And because back to this point is that I'm always looking for the right image. And I live in a small town in Pennsylvania, and I was walking in my village with my dogs at night, and this murder mystery is sort of loosely built on this Eastern Pennsylvania town. And I said, what if, what would be the cover of my novel? What image would perfectly capture? And I was walking my dogs at night, and there was a full moon and this platinum light coming in through the alleyway in my village, and there was shadow, and it was spooky and beautiful. And I said, that's it. And so I took out my iPhone and took a picture. And of course, being an OCD writer, the next thing I had is that, 350 pictures later. And then I
Yeah.
went to a publisher, a very cool publisher called Martha Hallett. And she does these beautiful sort of illustrated books. And I showed her, and she just said, let's do it. And she's one of these, old school risk takers who just works from their gut. And she's so brilliant. Anyway, so that's coming out. And then I'm hoping a novel will come out my novel will come out in 2026. But I'm also always looking for business people. And in fact, there's one Indian business person who's mentioned in the book, who I think has a great book in him, uh, Faisal Kotikalam, who is he's from Kerala in southern India, made his wealth in Dubai in the UAE, and has gone back to India, and he's reinventing the health and wellness industry, and he's spent $100 million in creating this extraordinary health center in Kerala in southern India, where he's marrying the best of Ayurvedic, the Ayurvedic treatments, the
Yeah.
ancient Hindu treatments, um, are really good because they recognize that our psyche is intricately linked to our soma, our body, and that you can't treat the body without treating the mind at the same time. That's what Western
What a revelation.
Yeah, and that's what Western science has lost.
It
The,
has.
the downside of the Ayurvedic treatment that is a lot of superstition based treatments rather than science driven treatments.
Hmm.
Conversely, in the West, it's all science and data driven, ignoring the psyche, the relation that our internal life has to our health. And so he brilliantly is putting the two together. So he's taking the best of Ayurvedic, ancient, the massages,
Clever.
one and putting it the best with science and putting the two together. So, for example, there is in meditation or in prayers, there is a tone that gets hit, and it's basically it's the God tone or the universal tone. It's a pitch that you hear in monks chanting in Buddhist temples that it hits a certain pitch that it kind of reverberates out. Well, or in certain, like in Gregorian chanting, or in certain choral voices, those prepubescent children, when they sing, they hit this kind of godlike tone. Well, there is scientifically, they have proven that when you hit this tone, how the mind reacts, and they've scientifically measured it. So Faisal brilliantly has created a dome in this property in Kerala where he has mimicked this tone,
Oh,
so that
clever.
when you're in your health retreat, you can go and experience without being religious, like having to say these prayers or that prayers, but that you can,
Yeah.
agnostically go in and experience this tone. So that's an
You-
example where he's putting the best of the
yeah.
West and the best of the East together.
I mean, this production is produced in India, so who knows? Maybe something incredibly lucrative and
Well, I
wonderful.
will definitely send it to him. If this is still
Right.
winds up in your
We're
editing
extending the
department,
invitation right
I will
now.
definitely, and he will spread the word.
Now, I mean, we all think your writing is captivated. Unfortunately, the lady sitting behind you is completely uninterested in, um,
Yes,
yeah,
that's
unfortunately,
scary.
I would
Scary. Oh,
say
but by
completely
the way,
dull. What?
that picture is from a very talented in the modern contemporary artist from Kerala called Nityan.
No,
And
I
it's
was actually referring to your dog
I
who,
know that. I know that. I know that. I mentioned it. She,
but listen,
she hit home. She already hit home.
I can't thank you enough for, first of all, for your wonderful book, and I wish
Thank
you
you.
so much success and and everything that comes to follow. We'll have another chat when your next book is coming out. But I just really want to thank you in the meantime for
Thank you, Lisa.
time.
Really heartfelt thanks. Thank you.
Super interesting. I'm calling my broker right away. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.